You're keen to write your first novel, but first you need to come up with a truly amazing story idea. But how do you do that? And then how do you turn that idea into an outline, and then a draft, and then a novel? Well, let's start with finding and developing an initial story idea. Here are some ideas on how to start, and throughout the process, I'll sketch out some of my own ideas for a novel that I'm definitely going to write at some point, once I finish the current series, and the next series, and some other things, but I'm definitely going to get to it. Onward and upward. Gather together any notes or ideas that you might already have for characters, story ideas, and that sort of thing. Grab a pen and paper and write down every great story idea you can think of. You could write the names of novels and films that you love, popular tropes or concepts, awesome characters that you've enjoyed in video games, TV series, and so on. Write down every idea that you can think of which gets you excited about the prospect of writing a novel. Start going through those ideas and circling the ones that really resonate with you. Make connections between ideas that could work together and rewrite your list as many times as you need to with the concepts that really work and gel together. You could group your ideas together in categories like the following: character traits like strengths, flaws, idiosyncrasies; worlds and settings like war, politics, other dimensions, that sort of thing; key conflicts and threats, both for the world itself and at the character level; goals or journeys. What you're looking for throughout this process are certain themes, characters, and concepts that could form the basis of a great story. At this stage, you might also want to start plotting out biographical details of your main characters or begin world building. All of this is important, but don't get too fixated on it at this stage of the process. Remember, the key here is progress, not perfection. Don't agonize over anything at this stage. Just go with good enough, because there'll be plenty of time to shape and perfect your story down the track. An easy way to encapsulate the overall direction or theme of your story might be to think of it in terms of movement from one place to another. That place might be literal, a fantasy journey to dunk a ring in a volcano of lava, or psychological, discovering the truth behind why your protagonist is fixated on eating green beans. What you're trying to get at here is the main flow of the story, a short synopsis which describes some key elements and outlines the hero's journey from one place to another. Try to formulate those ideas into a simple set of statements which describes the basic movement of your story. You can write this as a paragraph or 2 or 10, or just jot down dot points on a page. For example, Jane suffers from dislocative identity disorder. She shares her life with her sister, Eleanor, and a very understanding husband, Detective Nate Harrow. The two women communicate with one another by leaving messages on an old answering machine. While investigating a homicide, Jane's husband divulges details of a killer for hire who is terrorizing the city. One day, Jane goes to her answering machine expecting to hear from Eleanor, only to find the message from another, previously unknown identity, who fits the description of the hired killer Nate has described. Intrigued? But of course you are! The next thing to do, if you haven't already, is to try and frustrate the central movement of your story. If your hero is trying to recover something lost, how are you going to keep them from that goal? If they're looking for love, you might figure out a way to stop them from getting it. If they're trying to uncover hidden treasure, you'll need to frustrate that attempt. The key here is opposition. What makes the story interesting is discovering how your main character deals with the various oppositions and conflicts that are thrown in their path. No one wants to read a simple story from A to B without any problems at all. Conflict and opposition are the key. Using the previous example, you might want to do something like this. Every time Jane gets close to discovering her new alter ego, she passes out and wakes up to find hysterical messages from Elena on the answering machine. She needs to find a way to find out if she is in fact this hired killer, without triggering that personality's psychological defense mechanism. The kind of opposition you choose will throw up other questions. The answers to those questions will allow you to further develop your ideas and start to structure some basic oppositions for your story. The ultimate answer to this central conflict will lead to the climax and resolution of your story. You've got a basic concept for your book. You've introduced a key conflict and some hefty obstacles for your main character to overcome. But in order to finish the story, you'll need to figure out how your protagonist wins. Now, winning might not be terribly enjoyable for your main character. They may only partially win, or they might overcome one obstacle to find that there's another, larger obstacle now in their path, leading perhaps to book 2 in the series. You don't have to have everything figured out at this stage of the writing process, but if you can have a clear idea of the central thrust of your story, the main opposition and conflict, and a possible means of resolution, it will help you a great deal when it comes to outlining your book. Using our example, something like this might work. Jane goes to see a hypnotist who's able to take her deep into her own mind and organize a meeting with her alter ego. Jane confronts the assassin only to realize that Jane's entire life is a cover identity, a facade established by the assassin years earlier. The two personalities struggle, and eventually Jane wins out, bringing all three personalities together into a complete whole. But she finds herself suddenly waking with a gun in her hand, a dead victim nearby, and her husband charging through the door, shouting, "Police." Not the most original ending in the world, and it probably wouldn't be exactly how I'd end the book, but at this stage in the writing process, it's good enough to go on with. You've found a great idea and mapped out the basic movement of your story. You've identified your main characters and added conflict and opposition to keep their lives interesting. You've found a way out of the bind, and now you're looking back over the pages of your notes and asking yourself, is this idea really good enough to inspire a whole novel? Well, if this is your first novel, it's going to be a tricky question to answer. The truth is, if you're excited about the story and there are plenty of unanswered questions still to explore, but you're happy with the overall premise and movement of your idea, then it's as good a start as you could ever hope for. So, rather than stressing about whether your story idea is going to go the distance, let's push on to the outlining phase, because that's where you'll put meat on the bones and you'll be able to see just how far your idea will stretch. And before we move on, you should note that the single most important factor as to whether or not you'll finish this novel isn't the idea or your writing skill or how original or groundbreaking your story is. It's down to you and your ability to stay motivated, maintain a regular writing rhythm, and push through the lean times. Next, we move to the outlining phase. So, onward and upward. As always, leave comments or questions below, like and subscribe, and most importantly, get writing.